Hey everybody, today we are doing another topic video. This week I asked you guys what is a director that you think is overrated and why. Again, this is not meant to be necessarily a cynical video or a negative video. It's more to open up the discussion. It's obviously all opinion. I have done many of these overrated directors videos before. So, if you picked Chris Nolan or Steven Spielberg, I've already covered a lot of them. But we'll start with the first one here. Generally, I think all movie directors are overrated to a certain extent. When movies somehow evolved into films and started to be called an art form, the directors became one of the stars, which is why I think older movies, those before about 1960, were less pretentious and usually more entertaining. Thanks. That's a very interesting perspective, and I admit it's something that I contemplate a lot. What you're saying here, it reminds me of the ending of a movie called Babylon. Damien Chazelle's Babylon. I've talked about that film, probably too much at this point. I love it. It is very flawed. I bring it up because I think about the ending montage in that movie all the time. Now, I hate it in the context of the film. I find it incredibly derivative. But if you take that montage out of the movie and just look at it for what it is, I think it's incredibly well done. And I think it is a very strange, existential meditation, but like a destructive one in a way. It has a destructive edge to it. And it's like the history of cinema, just all kind of combusting. It's like you're seeing all of this revolutionary art and it's sprouting here and there all over. And, after time though, there's this weird vicious cycle that starts to happen. We start to copy them, and then they start to copy them, and then it just, it keeps going. There are certain directors that are just so enamored by the pastiche and the aesthetic of historical cinema that it's almost defined them instead of something coming from the soul, something being truthful. And when I look at films, especially silent films, I love silent films because yes, there's that naivete. It's like the kinds of influences were not from film, obviously. So it's like coming from artistic movements. And there's something organic about that. And even in the same vein, I was talking about Disney movies recently and talking about my favorite era of Disney. Most people tend to pick the golden age, the late 80s into the early 90s. And that is a great era, of course, but it's too conscious in my opinion. It's too kind of lofty, very aware of, the prestige of Disney. And I liked it more when that didn't really exist. Again, it's like we were developing things as it was going. Not to say great films can't be made today, especially pastiche films. They do exist. The Substance, as an example, is a perfect example of one that I absolutely adored. It's just that, I prefer movies from the 1930s, the 20s. There's something original and individual. Gareth Edwards. Most might not recognize the name, but they certainly praise his work. Both Rogue One and Godzilla 2014 are often described as cinematic experiences, but I find them to be very mediocre films from a filmmaking, editing, performance, writing, and directing standpoint. The Creator is also a bad film, and I'm not really looking forward to his entry in the Jurassic Park series. While his visuals are decent, I find his characters and overall storytelling to be quite bland. Yeah, I do too, for all of the reasons that you mentioned. There's something strange about Edwards where it's like in certain ways, when you talk about cinematic experiences, it's like the dressing is there. His instincts visually and all this, it's like it's on point to a degree, and yet it's so off at the same time. It's like you said, it's like the instincts to me are completely off when it comes to characters, storytelling. When I look at a movie like Rogue One, I actually did like the opening of that film. And again, that plays to Gareth Edwards' strengths. It's because beautiful images, very reminiscent of Kurosawa, David Lean, Sergio Leone. It's like he understands the archetypal resonance there. But I also appreciate that, he not only cares about the grandeur, he also cares about the grit. There's a grit to the filmmaking, and I appreciate that. But again, it never remotely comes together for me. I hated Rogue One. A lot of people disagree with me on that review, but I 100% stand by it. That film was an attempt to kind of strip it all back and bring it back to the quintessential hero's journey, which is, very Star Wars, but it's again, because his instincts for storytelling are so off, all it did was just make all of the flaws more glaring, more monotone. The emotional threads are just too shaky for me to care about any of the characters, but I also feel like there's something dark, dramatic, and self-serious about his filmmaking. I wish he would lighten it up a little bit. A movie like The Creator, which you mentioned, that was a movie that I think needed to be a big statement if you're going to do an original sci-fi piece of work, because you just don't see those very often these days. But it was just very boring. I don't remember it really at all. I just think he's really aesthetically gifted, but there's just not much to sink your teeth into beyond that. I like to say a lot of times it's like you have like these big cinematic templates, and people just kind of come in and decide to play house, or directors decide they kind of want to come in and do their own thing and take credit for it. That's kind of how I feel about him. He's not untalented, obviously, but it's like when I find out he's attached to a movie like Jurassic Park, it doesn't interest me particularly. Next one, John Hughes. Everything he made couldn't feel more outdated. It's almost embarrassing. Ferris Bueller is the worst classic I've ever seen. Well, I talked about Ferris Bueller's Day Off at some point on this channel. I reviewed it, I think, and I have a lot of issues with that movie, and I talked about them, I think, in detail. But I think when it comes to John Hughes, look, there are certain directors that have an interesting ability to be both dated and timeless at the same time, where it's like you can forgive the dated nature, or it can kind of add a charm to things, a nice nostalgia. There are certain things when you look at the entire canon of Hughes films where it really doesn't hold up, and there are certain people that consider some of his films offensive. But to me, I don't know, there is a charm, even if his films are flawed. Sometimes they are strange or awkward. Pacing issues for sure. Comedic timing isn't always right. It's rough around the edges, but I really do think that there are emotional threads that feel strong compared to somebody like Gareth Edwards, where I really don't feel that much at all. I do think in his best films, Hughes films, there's true meaning. The Breakfast Club, as an example. Is it a perfect film? No, but I think it resonates with people of all ages. They're characters that work. And I could talk about Ferris Bueller all day, and I feel like I have. How I can't stand Ferris as a character, and he really doesn't work in a lot of ways. There's a lot of things in that film that doesn't work. I look at the whole cat and mouse comedy chase stuff between the principal and certain character relationships. So many things are underdeveloped. It is a mess. And yet, there are elements of that film that I think really, really work, and I dare you to find that kind of stuff in current teen movies. I know I've talked about it so many times, but it's like there's an existential weight to that movie of knowing a big transition is coming up. I love, the moment where they're kind of leaning against the glass when they're up on the skyscraper. It's like that is a really, again, existential thing. And I love when they're at the museum and he's looking into the painting and we're zooming in. The twist and shout sequence. It's like the movie, it's strange and kind of awkward, and you're not sure where it's going at first. And then, I don't know, interesting things start happening. And then it becomes strangely serious. So I think there is more to Hughes than just making the teen movies, the teen comedy, slice of life, whatever. Next, Emerald Fennell. Promising Young Woman doesn't stand up well to a second viewing. Saltburn has some great scenes, but overall a big disappointment, and I couldn't suspend my disbelief regarding that, or what Barry Keoghan's character gets away with, and the naivete of the wealthy family. I don't expect her to improve much either, but I hope I'm wrong. She definitely has talent as a writer/director. Yeah, I think this is excellent what you're saying here. What I talked about at the beginning of this video, that whole montage in Babylon, when I think of a director that perfectly encapsulates where we are now, and not necessarily in a good way, actually kind of in a negative way, I'm sorry to say, I think of people like Emerald Fennell. I'm glad that you said she is talented, because she absolutely is talented, but I agree with you. I know she's only made really 2 films, but based on what I've seen, I don't see her improving that much either. I think she's really kind of settling into a style and becoming confident in it. But when I reviewed Saltburn, I talked about it. I think I called it scrapbook cinema, which to me goes beyond pastiche filmmaking. I mean, it really is a scrapbook. So she is an incredibly academic filmmaker is what I mean. I look at a movie like Promising Young Woman. It's a stunning film. It's a very well-made film, and you remember it. I think that's one thing that she has. You definitely remember an Emerald Fennell film, and I have to admit, I'm smitten with her taste levels when it comes to aesthetic. If there is a director that I would love to see featured on AD, Architectural Digest for YouTube, which is our current MTV Cribs, I guess, it would be her, or Luca Guadagnino. I'm sure their houses are incredible. But unfortunately, when you remove this gorgeous exterior, to me, it's all hollow. And Promising Young Woman, that's It's a neo-feminist statement piece. It's got this like badass, aggressive attitude going on, but it completely whimpers when it is confronted with a complex idea or any contradictions. And ultimately, the anti-hero at the center, her motivations are ridiculous. I think the movie is going to be studied years from now, but not for good reasons. So obviously there was something about this woman that interested me, and I really wanted to see what she was going to come up with next. And then, you know, with Saltburn, yes, it is like this postmodern satire, but it's another talented Mr. Ripley, but without any emotionality or tension driving it from the core. There's nothing, again, beyond most of the historical references, movie references, stylistic references, these molds that are not necessarily natural. They're just incredibly well researched. But that's the thing about a lot of like academic directors these days. It's like they feel like they need to make a statement about something, typically, you know, social or political. And there's just an inflated sense of delusion where we're resting on what other people have done because we're lazy. But I mean, I think she would be amazing when it came to like, yeah, art direction, production design. She could have her hands in almost every department, but I just don't think it comes together as a director, at least yet. But yes, that is my video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website. As always, it is deepfocuslens.com. I'm an artist. I do commissioned portraits, and I also sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons who are great. Guys, thank you so much for your support. Welcome to all the new members. If you are interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.